and it's a powder keg. There's no victory over there, and I would say that what would happen if we leave? They'd probably be fighting and killing each other, but they wouldn't be killing us, and I don't think we need to be over there. Now, Obama was a little more straightforward about Afghanistan. Even in the campaign, he said, we need more troops. It may be the long war, but it's the good war. Well, one thing for sure, it's the long war. It's longer now by 50% of the World War I and World War II put together. So I think he's already won that argument. It's a long war, but he hasn't won the argument that it's a good war. It is not a good war for us. Let me tell you, it's bad news for us. Just think of how we flip-flop. We used to be a ally with Saddam Hussein. We have pictures of Rumsfeld and Saddam Hussein. And we used to be allies with Osama bin Laden. He was a freedom fighter then, but now he's a terrorist. So it goes on, and then the history is so clear of the failures of Afghanistan that we seem to never learn, but they continue to argue this is a crucial war. But right now, they know there's no Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, and this whole thing merges together, the Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, and they're all creatures of our policy in many ways. When we were allies of Osama bin Laden, our CIA subsidized these madrasa schools to teach radicalism because we wanted them to be anti-communist. So we actually subsidize this, and then we're shocked when these things come back on us. So it's the flip-flopping and the aggravation, and now, of course, the Taliban, some of the probably more violent ones, have shifted their locations. They're over in Pakistan. And when I was in the Air Force, I visited that area, and believe me, it's rough territory. And they now use a lot of drones. But it's very disturbing. At one time, I thought this was supposed to be a secret, but I read it today in the paper again. It was one of our drones that went in and hit a target in Pakistan and killed up to a number of people, but it was sent in by the CIA. Our CIA is running the drone program, and it's on and on. Just think how this whole thing got started in 1953. 1953 is when we overthrew, Mossadegh and installed the Shah, and he was a ruthless dictator. They remember these things. You know, the people in that region never forget, and it seems like we don't remember anything. But it's time we did. It's time we studied history and understood it, understood what the principles of our Constitution mean, to understand what the principle of non-intervention is all about, understanding the principles of sound money. If we did this, we could get back to our sanities. But right now, we have embarked on a different course. In Washington, it is a mess. Believe me. I guess you would believe me on that. It is a mess. They do a lot of shouting and demands. It's a contest on who has the power. And the policies aren't really that different. When one party gets out of power, they're pure. And then when they get in power, they're the same. The areas that there's never any change on is foreign policy. Both parties, all leadership, no matter what Obama said during the campaign, he is now an interventionist, strong interventionist. And, of course, George Bush was against nation building when he was running against Clinton, against Clinton program. So we do this, and yet the policies never seem to change. They continue. Foreign policy doesn't change. Monetary policy doesn't change. Domestic policies don't change. We just go on and on and on. And that is why I believe so strongly that the basic principles have to be understood. We just can't say, well, a little bit of this is good, a little bit of this is good. Yes, we can spread ourselves too thinly around the world, and that is bad, but we have to do the good wars. No, we need to do only the wars that are dictated to us by our law. And we don't go to war, at least we're not supposed to go to war under the rules unless there's a declaration of war. But it's been a long time since we've had a declaration of war. That's been World War II. So these are ongoing wars, all this fighting and killing going on, and we're spreading our goodness. This is what the neocon says. We have to do it. We have a moral obligation to spread our goodness. You know, we give most of the countries of the world two options. First, we go in and we pretend we want to talk to them, and we offer them something. If they concede and they do exactly what we want, we give them money. If they say, no, we don't want to do it, or if they said they'll do it for a while, then they quit, then they don't get our money, and then they get our bombs. So there's only two options, bombing or giving money. I think there should be a third option. Why don't we just talk to people, try to improve ourselves, have a strong national defense, and I believe the world would be much more peaceful if we did it that way. At home, we still have problems going on. We have a war here at home that I don't like. I think it's caused us a great deal of harm and suffering, and that has to do with the war on drugs. I think it's a total failure. There was a study that just came out, and in 2008, there was an arrest every 18 seconds in this country due to drugs. There were 1,700,000 who were arrested and put in prison. That was only because they were holding something. No violent acts whatsoever. Now, drugs are terrible, and I preach against them. I think the many drugs that are used illegally are very bad, but I think the drugs that are used legally are very bad too. And but the laws are very bad, and they cause a lot more harm than the drugs do. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge to our principle of state sovereignty. The states are supposed to write law and deal with violent acts. So I don't have a whole lot of problem with the states doing some regulations on alcohol and making sure 12-year-olds can't go in and get beer, in a food store. But I'm told that these kids that can't buy beer can buy marijuana and other drugs off the street easier. So it just doesn't work. But what if it comes along and they find out that marijuana isn't nearly as bad as they claim, and that marijuana can be helpful, and marijuana might help certain illnesses? Who's to make the decision? Should it be the patient along with a doctor's advice, or should it be some bureaucrat who's a drug warrior from Washington, D.C. that wants to put people in prison over and above the state laws that allow medicinal marijuana? I would say that the local people ought to have the right to do the regulation, and the individual ought to have the right to take the responsibility on themselves on what they should use. The drug war has not been here forever. It's been here basically since the 70s. It was the war on drugs really got a lot of movement in the early 70s, and there's something like $700 or $800 billion spent on this. But some of it is difficult to measure because it's the management of the prisons and the interest you pay on the debt you run up, and so it could be much bigger. But all these programs are out there just causing more and more harm. So this actually got started, in the early part of the last century. Of course, people said, drinking is bad for you, and drinking is. You can drink too much, and it's very bad. So the movement came, and they said, okay, we're going to have prohibition. Prohibition is the solution to this social problem: people drink too much. And so amazingly, what I am amazed about is the people back then actually believe that you're supposed to change the Constitution if you want to do something like that. We don't even think about that anymore. So they changed the Constitution. It was a total failure, created a lot of crime, and the amendment was repealed. But now we have this prohibition of all drugs and avoidance of all state laws without any concern about the Constitution. But one day, maybe when the other wars end because we run out of money, we'll run out of money as well on this issue. The risky business politically on this is, in Washington, there's a lot of people who would say they agree with me on this, but boy, they said, I can't vote that way. I can't vote the way you do on the House floor because I'd lose my congressional seat, and therefore I have to appear like I'm, tough on drugs. So it goes on and on. And there's a lot of that goes on in Washington. A lot of people don't want to vote against a certain program, even though they know it's going to be a failure. Oh, I don't want to be seen as being against the poor people. I don't want